July 1967, Hong Kong. Bruce Lee stood in front of a factory, eyes locked with his challenger.
My friends, the time has come to unite.
Seven people were in
will
that
rise to that.
each one an eyewitness to what no one had ever spoken of again. Bruce Lee never spoke about what happened, but what they saw, what they felt, changed how they understood him. Forever. 1967, Hong Kong. The year marks a pivotal moment in Bruce Lee's journey. A young man still in the early stages of his career, but already a controversial figure, Bruce was at the crossroads of a cultural shift. He had returned to Hong Kong after several years in the United States, where he'd begun to make a name for himself in martial arts and film. However, in Hong Kong, he wasn't yet a legend. He was a man with a reputation that stirred both admiration and disdain. At this point in his life, Bruce was already far from the humble student he had once been. His unapologetic philosophy of martial arts, blending the efficiency of Wing Chun, the fluidity of boxing, and the unpredictability of street fighting, was too unorthodox for many. For the traditional martial artists, his rejection of the rules and his focus on speed and power rather than form was heresy. He wasn't just challenging the traditionalists in the ring. He was challenging centuries of established thought. Bruce's arrival in Hong Kong had been met with excitement, but also with skepticism. He was known for his unconventional approach to fighting and his belief that martial arts should be adaptable, not bound by rigid structures. His school, the Jun Fan Gung Fu Institute, quickly garnered a small but loyal following. Yet, his open challenges to local martial arts masters had caused a stir. Some embraced him, some rejected him, and others saw him as a threat to the very fabric of traditional kung fu. Why his reputation was controversial. In Hong Kong, reputation was everything, especially among the martial artists. Lee's brash personality, coupled with his unique approach to combat, polarized the local community. For the traditional martial artists, there was a lingering suspicion of Bruce's intentions. To them, martial arts was not merely a skill but a sacred art, passed down through generations. Bruce's willingness to teach non-Chinese students, his rejection of the traditional structures, and his fusion of styles made him a disruptive force in a tightly knit community. Bruce Lee had become a lightning rod for controversy. To some, he was a genius, an artist pushing the boundaries of human physicality. To others, he was an outsider with a loose grip on tradition, challenging the very foundation of martial arts. But it wasn't just his philosophy that sparked the debate, it was his physical prowess. Bruce wasn't just a theorist, he was a fighter, and he had already proven, time and again, that he could back up his words with action. But his success in breaking barriers had made him just as many enemies as fans. Why this challenge mattered. This moment, this challenge, wasn't just another fight, it was the culmination of everything that Bruce had been striving for. His reputation was on the line, but so was the legacy he was building. By this time, Bruce Lee had already achieved some recognition as a film star, and his ability to showcase his skills on screen had earned him a growing following. Yet, in the underground martial arts world, there were still doubts about his legitimacy. Many believed his fame was due to film stardom rather than his martial abilities. The challenger knew this, and he wasn't about to let Bruce Lee's status as a star overshadow his credibility as a fighter. The stakes weren't just about proving Bruce Lee's physical capabilities. They were about exposing the vulnerability behind the legend. For the people of Hong Kong, this was more than a fight. It was a confrontation between tradition and modernity, between the old way and the new. Bruce had been living in a world of scrutiny and challenge, but this moment, this private fight in a hidden dojo, would force him to face the harshest reality yet. The question hanging in the air wasn't whether Bruce could win, but whether he could survive the darkness of doubt that lingered over him. As the whispers about the upcoming challenge spread, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Bruce was about to face not only a dangerous fighter, but also the looming pressure of proving that he was more than just a character on a movie screen. The man who sought out Bruce Lee was no stranger to the shadows, known only as the Phantom, a name whispered in the darker corners of Hong Kong's underground martial arts circles. He was a figure cloaked in mystery, his real identity as elusive as his fighting style. Some said he was a former champion from the Chinese underground fighting circuit. Others claimed he had been a mercenary. His presence was known, but no one could say exactly who he was or where he had come from. What was certain was his reputation. He was a formidable, dangerous fighter, untamed, unpredictable, and without any formal allegiances to traditional schools of martial arts. Who he was, the Phantom wasn't a man of many words. In fact, the few who had met him described him as almost silent in demeanor, a man whose eyes alone seemed to speak volumes. He had no titles to claim, no recognizable lineage or family name, and he never sought the limelight. He moved like a shadow, his name not born from any official title, but from the fear he instilled in anyone who had the misfortune of facing him. To most, he was more myth than man. His legend was built on his brutal efficiency in the ring, and on the rare occasions when he was seen in action, it was always with a savage purpose, to break his opponents, not merely to defeat them. Why he was dangerous, what made the Phantom so dangerous, wasn't just his strength. It was his lack of formality. He didn't fight like the martial artist Bruce had trained with in the past. He wasn't bound by the rules of any one style, nor was he tied to tradition. The Phantom fought as though every fight was a matter of survival, an unrelenting clash of instincts, with no regard for the elegance or flow that Bruce Lee had worked so hard to refine. Where Bruce's strength lay in precision, fluidity, and control, the Phantom thrived on raw aggression and unpredictability. His ability to read his opponent, to react with terrifying speed and instinct, made him a relentless threat. He wasn't a polished fighter in the classical sense, but his power and unpredictability made him someone not to be underestimated. Rumors about his past only added to the fear surrounding him. Some said that the Phantom had once been a soldier in the underworld of Shanghai, a man who had fought in underground battles where the stakes were life or death. Others claimed that he had trained in the streets, picking up techniques from any fighter who crossed his path. But no matter where he came from, he had earned his reputation the hard way, through brutal, no-holds-barred street fights. Why this wasn't a publicity stunt for Bruce Lee, challenges were no longer new. He had already fought, on film, in the dojo, and on the street, but this challenge was different. The Phantom wasn't interested in fame or recognition. He wasn't trying to make a name for himself or build a career off of beating Bruce Lee. No, the Phantom had a singular goal: to prove that Bruce Lee, for all his hype and his groundbreaking philosophy, was just another fighter. Nothing more, nothing less. This wasn't about becoming famous or earning a title. This was a personal mission, one that aimed to strip Bruce of his legend. The Phantom didn't care about the movie star persona that Bruce had crafted. What mattered to him was the reality of the fight. And the reality was simple. Bruce Lee had become the symbol of a new way of thinking about martial arts, one that transcended tradition and form. The Phantom didn't believe in that. He believed in power, in domination, and in the raw intensity of combat. If Bruce Lee was to be the future of martial arts, then the Phantom was going to prove that the old ways still had a place in the ring. What made him credible, the Phantom didn't need a reputation to prove his worth. His skills spoke for themselves. Those who had seen him fight recalled the unpredictability with which he moved, the way he seemed to anticipate his opponent's next steps before they even made them. There was a cold, calculating quality to his fighting style, almost as though every movement was deliberate and planned. Bruce Lee might have had the world's attention, but the Phantom had something even more dangerous. He had a deep understanding of what it meant to fight for survival. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Phantom's challenge was that it was unpredictable. Bruce Lee had prepared for many things. He had faced fighters from across the world, each with their own unique techniques. But the Phantom wasn't someone you could prepare for. There were no patterns to follow, no preset ways to anticipate his strikes. He fought like an animal, untamed and savage, yet just enough control existed in his every move to make him deadly. He had never backed down from a challenge, and it was clear that this fight was no different. For the Phantom, this wasn't about making a name. It was about proving something deeper, that Bruce Lee, for all his fame, had never truly faced a man like him. The dojo was far from anything Bruce Lee had encountered in his career. Hidden in the winding streets of Kowloon, it was a nondescript building, barely noticeable amid the urban chaos that surrounded it. The walls were cracked, the floors scuffed with years of use, and the air thick with the lingering scent of sweat and chalk. It was a far cry from the clean, well-maintained training spaces that Bruce had become accustomed to in both his Hollywood days and his own martial arts academy. Here, there were no bright lights, no cameras, no audience, just the raw, gritty reality of the fight. The location had been chosen deliberately, away from prying eyes, away from the media, away from the glamour of Bruce Lee's public persona. There were no distractions here, no outside pressures. Just two men, face to face, each carrying the weight of their own reputations. For Bruce, it was the weight of his burgeoning fame, the expectations of his fans and his critics. For the Phantom, it was the weight of his quest to destroy the myth of Bruce Lee and prove his own dominance. Only 7 people were present to witness what was about to unfold. All of them were Bruce's friends, disciples, and longtime training partners. They had followed him from his earliest days in Hong Kong, through his struggles and triumphs. Some had trained with him in private. Others had observed his growth from a promising young martial artist into a rising star. Now, they would serve as silent witnesses to a moment that would define not only Bruce's future, but their own understanding of the man they had come to respect. Rules, or lack of them. Bruce Lee had faced challenges before, but this one was different. There were no formalized rules here. The Phantom had made it clear from the start. This wasn't about respecting any tradition. It wasn't about scoring points. This was pure combat, a test of endurance, skill, and survival. The fight would end only when one man was physically incapable of continuing. For someone like Bruce Lee, who had carefully structured his training and philosophy around controlled power, this absence of rules was a stark departure. His entire philosophy had been built on the concept of efficiency and directness. But here, in this dimly lit space, there was no room for philosophy, only action. Bruce would have to adapt to an opponent who didn't play by the rules, who didn't care about concepts like honor or respect. Witness setup, the 7 witnesses stood quietly against the walls of the dojo, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and unease. They knew the stakes. This was not just another sparring match. This was a test of Bruce Lee's legacy, a challenge to everything he had worked for, everything he believed in. They had seen him fight before, but never under these conditions, never in a scenario so raw and unrefined. The air was thick with tension as Bruce and the Phantom faced each other in the center of the room. There were no cheers, no encouraging shouts. The room was silent except for the occasional scraping sound of feet on the wooden floor. The witnesses stood, knowing that the next few moments would shape the future of martial arts in Hong Kong. Emotional atmosphere as Bruce stepped forward, there was a quiet sense of finality. This wasn't a moment for heroics or grand speeches. The air was thick with the weight of the challenge, a challenge not just to Bruce's skills, but to his very identity. Every movement, every breath, every shift of weight would be scrutinized by those who watched. And for the first time in his career, Bruce Lee felt something he hadn't anticipated, doubt. There were no cameras here to capture his every move. No lights to cast dramatic shadows across his face. Here, it was just him and the Phantom, 2 men locked in a battle that was about to push them both to their limits. The rawness of the moment hit Bruce like a wave, reminding him that despite his fame, despite his philosophy, he was just a man. The stakes had never been clearer. In this room, the line between myth and reality would be drawn in the blood of the fight. The moment the challenge was issued, the room seemed to tighten with anticipation. The air was thick with a quiet tension, the kind that only precedes real combat. The 7 witnesses stood along the edges, their eyes fixed on the 2 men in the center of the dojo. Bruce Lee, dressed in simple white training gear, his feet bare against the cold wooden floor, looked focused but calm. His opponent, the Phantom, appeared every bit the wild, untamed force of nature he had been described as. His stance was low, his body relaxed yet coiled like a spring, ready to explode at any moment. Physical realism, there was no grand flourish here. No dramatic bow or ceremonial exchange. This was a fight. And in a fight, Bruce Lee was already calculating. He knew the Phantom's reputation, understood that the man's unpredictable nature made him a dangerous adversary. Yet, Bruce had never been one to shy away from a challenge. His mind sharpened, his senses heightened. This wasn't a match for trophies. It was a battle to prove something far deeper. The first movement came for Bruce. It was swift, too fast for most eyes to follow. A feint, a quick jab aimed at the Phantom's head, testing his reaction. The Phantom didn't flinch. Instead, his body leaned back just enough to avoid the strike. Then, in an instant, his arm shot forward. It was raw, unrefined, but powerful. The Phantom's fist collided with Bruce's ribs hard. Bruce felt the hit. It was unexpected. The Phantom was no technician, but the power behind that punch was undeniable. Bruce exhaled sharply, the pain registering through his midsection. He sidestepped immediately, putting space between them, but the Phantom closed it, moving forward with a savage, relentless pace. His punches weren't pretty. They weren't precise, but they came from a place of pure aggression. Every one of them intended to land with maximum impact. Specific movements, Bruce's footwork became the centerpiece of his defense. He danced around the Phantom, his body shifting fluidly as he avoided another wild strike. A low sweep from the Phantom came next, a desperate attempt to bring Bruce down to the floor. But Bruce anticipated it. His legs shot upward, his foot connecting with the Phantom's jaw before he could even react. The strike was clean, precise, but the Phantom didn't stagger. He absorbed it, almost as though it didn't faze him at all. Bruce adjusted, his mind already calculating his next move. His training had taught him that control was everything. But the Phantom wasn't interested in control. He was interested in breaking through Bruce's defense, smashing the elegant structure Bruce had built with years of training. Each strike, each movement was a test to see if Bruce's composure could hold. Speed versus control for Bruce, everything was a measure of balance. Speed and power, yes, but control was the defining factor. He didn't rely on raw muscle alone. His greatest weapon was precision and the ability to read his opponent. He had faced many skilled fighters in his life, but none who fought like this. The Phantom's strikes weren't predictable. They didn't follow the flow of a traditional fight. Instead, his attacks were unpredictable, like a storm of chaos, crashing against Bruce's shield of control. Bruce moved in, testing the Phantom's response. A lightning-fast jab followed by a spinning back kick, a sequence Bruce had mastered. The Phantom dodged the jab with an unexpected roll and rushed in, shoulder first, his body pressing against Bruce's in a brutal display of strength. For a moment, Bruce felt the full weight of the Phantom's mass. It wasn't just a physical struggle, it was an emotional one. Bruce had always prided himself on being able to outmaneuver opponents, to control the fight through precision. But here, against the Phantom, there was no room for finesse. Clear demonstration of skill shift, then came the pivotal moment. A wild uppercut from the Phantom landed, grazing Bruce's chin. It wasn't clean, it wasn't elegant, but it had impact. Bruce recoiled for just a split second, a rare moment of vulnerability that didn't go unnoticed by the witnesses. The Phantom, sensing the shift in Bruce's rhythm, lunged again, this time with more calculated aggression. Bruce's reflexes kicked in, his instinct to protect himself kicking into overdrive. A roundhouse kick to the Phantom's ribs sent a shockwave through the room. The Phantom staggered, but still didn't fall. The room's atmosphere shifted. This wasn't just a test of physical skill. This was a test of wills. Bruce had always prided himself on his ability to control the fight, to dictate the pace. But here, in this raw, unfiltered exchange, control was slipping through his fingers. The Phantom wasn't interested in flow. He was interested in breaking Bruce's rhythm, disorienting him, forcing him into a fight for survival. Bruce knew this was just the beginning, and if he wasn't careful, the cost of this battle would rise exponentially. The fight had shifted from a test of skill to a brutal exchange of endurance and willpower. The dojo, once a quiet space filled with nothing but the sound of movement, was now alive with the rhythm of battle, the sound of fists striking flesh, the sharpness of a quick footstep, the grunt of exertion. The witnesses stood in silence, watching as the two men pushed each other to their limits. The atmosphere had changed. What had started as a controlled, calculated contest was now spiraling into something darker, more visceral. There was no room for composure now, no space for philosophical reflection. This was pure violence, stripped of artifice. Real damage. Bruce had taken a few solid blows now. His breathing had become heavier, his chest rising and falling as he tried to keep pace with the Phantom's relentless onslaught. His ribs ached from the first strike, a dull, persistent pain that didn't fade. His cheek stung where the Phantom's uppercut had grazed him. And his hands were beginning to feel the strain of the punches and blocks, his knuckles bruised and raw. The Phantom wasn't slowing down. If anything, he seemed to be feeding off the violence, growing more vicious with every passing second. His eyes were wide with intensity, his movements erratic, almost animalistic in their speed. The Phantom wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting to prove something, to prove that Bruce Lee, the Golden Boy, the myth, was just another man, capable of pain, capable of failure. Bruce's thoughts raced as he circled the room, looking for an opening. His mind was still sharp, but his body was beginning to betray him. His footwork was slower, more labored. The Phantom's wild attacks were starting to land more frequently, his punches growing heavier as they connected with Bruce's torso, his arms, his face. For the first time in the fight, Bruce's body felt the weight of his own mortality. He had faced brutal opponents before, but none like this. His vision blurred for a split second as another punch landed hard against his ribs. He staggered back, gasping for air, but his instincts kicked in. He couldn't afford to stop, not yet. He had to keep moving. Bruce pushed close to the edge in this moment. Bruce Lee wasn't just a martial artist. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a man on the edge of his own limits. The Phantom's blows weren't just hurting him physically. They were pushing him to the point where his carefully constructed sense of control began to crumble. His mind screamed for him to hold it together, but his body was betraying him. With every second, Bruce's body was becoming more battered. His movements grew slower. His fists, once so precise, were now starting to feel heavy. He needed to end this, but how? The Phantom wasn't going to give him that luxury. Bruce couldn't count on his speed alone anymore. He had to dig deeper. Moment of choice. Destroy or control, a moment of hesitation. A rare one for Bruce. Hung in the air. The Phantom lunged again, and Bruce saw the opening he had been waiting for. The Phantom's left side was exposed, his defense temporarily faltering after a wild swing. Bruce could finish him in an instant. A punch to the throat, a blow to the jaw. There was nothing stopping him from ending the fight here right now. But as Bruce raised his arm to strike, something inside him hesitated. His fist hung in the air, suspended between the primal urge to end the fight and the understanding of what it would cost. The Phantom wasn't going to stop. He wouldn't stop until Bruce was broken, until the myth of the man was shattered. But Bruce had learned, in his own philosophy, that violence was a choice, not a necessity. He lowered his fist, forcing himself to remember that control was the core of his being. He could destroy the Phantom, but what would that prove? Nothing more than that he was just another man capable of violence. No, Bruce didn't want to break the man. He wanted to break the cycle, to prove that his strength wasn't defined by his ability to crush his opponent, but by his ability to rise above the chaos. Emotional crack in composure in that moment. Bruce felt something shift inside him. An emotional crack, something raw and vulnerable. He realized that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for his own understanding of who he was, what he had become, and whether he was willing to sacrifice his humanity to preserve a legend. The physical pain was one thing, but the emotional toll was something else entirely. Bruce knew that if he didn't control the fight, if he didn't keep his composure, he would lose something far more important than this fight. He would lose the very thing that made him Bruce Lee. The room was silent. The fight had ended, but the air hung heavy, still thick with the tension of what had just transpired. The Phantom stood across from Bruce Lee, his body bruised, bloodied, but unbowed. His chest heaved as he tried to steady his breath, still glaring at Bruce with the same fire that had ignited the battle in the first place. He had come to prove a point, to expose Bruce as just another man. But there was no victory here, not for him, not for anyone. Bruce, on the other hand, had staggered to a standstill, his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Sweat streamed down his face, his body aching, each movement a reminder of the toll the fight had taken. He had been pushed to the edge, forced to confront his own vulnerabilities, not just as a martial artist, but as a man. There was no easy victory here, no dramatic moment of triumph, only the quiet aftermath of what had just happened. Long-term consequences of the fight had left more than just physical scars. For Bruce, it was the emotional weight of the moment that would stay with him. The hesitation, the brief but profound moral decision he had made to control, not destroy, would haunt him for years to come. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about the realization that his power, his potential, had limits, that the very legend he had built up, brick by brick, could be shattered in an instant. In the aftermath, Bruce would often reflect on the choice he had made, not to end the fight with violence, but to show restraint. To him, it wasn't a defeat. It was a confirmation of his belief that true strength lay in control, in knowing how much force to use and when. But for the witnesses in the room, Bruce's decision spoke volumes about the man he had become. He was not a god, untouchable and beyond reproach. He was a man, just like anyone else, struggling with the weight of his own power and responsibility. How it changed Bruce never spoke about the challenge again. Not to the media, not to his friends, and certainly not to the people who admired him from afar. But it changed him. His focus sharpened. His training became even more intense. He began to explore his own limits in a way he never had before. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. The challenge had cracked something open inside him. An awareness of his own humanity. A realization that being the best didn't mean being invincible. His legend, too, shifted. He became more than just the golden boy of martial arts. He became a man who had faced true danger, true vulnerability, and had walked away from it with a deeper understanding of who he was. His films, his teachings, and his very philosophy evolved, as if this fight had been the crucible through which he was reborn. Bruce Lee, the man who had once been driven by the need to prove himself, now understood that strength was not just about dominance, but about choice, restraint, and understanding one's own limits. How witnesses remembered it, the 7 witnesses who had stood silently in that room, would never forget what they had seen. To them, the fight wasn't just a demonstration of skill. It was a moment of revelation. They had seen Bruce Lee at his most vulnerable, at his most human, and in that vulnerability, they found a deeper respect for him. He was no longer just a fighter. They saw him as a man struggling with the same demons they had all faced. Years later, when asked about that fight, they spoke of it in hushed tones, as though the very memory of it carried a weight that could never be fully expressed. They spoke of the tension in the air, of the raw brutality of the fight, but most of all, they spoke of the moment when Bruce Lee, poised to finish his opponent, hesitated. That hesitation, his moral choice to control, not destroy, became the cornerstone of how they remembered him. To them, it wasn't just his physical prowess that made Bruce Lee a legend. It was his humanity. Quote-worthy closing line: "The strongest man in the room is not the one who wins. It's the one who knows exactly how much damage he chose not to do."